Hi, everybody. Welcome to my spiritual journey. This is the third video on this channel that I made. And today I'm going to talk about the relationship between science and spirituality. Most people seem to think that they're very separate, very different ways of looking at the world. A lot of scientists tend to be atheist or agnostic. A lot of spiritual people, religious people tend to dismiss modern science, but I actually what I'm hoping to convince you tonight is that they're actually science and spirituality are very similar in a lot of ways, and I think a lot of science, particularly on modern science, inspires a lot of spirituality. At least it's inspired me in a lot of my spiritual views. So let's start by looking at the Middle Ages. This is before modern science, and people were very superstitious at that time. The Catholic Church was the dominant power in Europe, and they kind of spread their dogmatic views, which were based on the New Testament. And then there was also a lot of, kind of superstitious nonsense along with that. But that was before anybody knew anything about modern science. And then we had the scientific revolution starting in the early 17th century that culminated with this guy here, Isaac Newton. Um, and it started with a guy named Bacon who came up with what we call the scientific method, which is you start with a hypothesis and then you perform an experiment like Newton's doing here with his prism. Um, and then, based on your observations, you come up with a conclusion, which becomes what's known as a theory. And that's kind of how we learn about the world through science. Very different way than through religion or spirituality, at least during the Middle Ages. But anyway, let me just continue. I know a lot about physics, so I'm going to give you a very brief summary of pretty much everything we've learned about physics up to now. So Newton was kind of the first big pioneer. But then after that, we had the theory of electricity and magnetism formulated by a guy named James Clerk Maxwell. And these were four equations he came up with. And these four equations, they're pretty complicated differential equations. I'm not going to try to explain them. But they involve two fields called the electric and magnetic fields. And together, those four equations explain everything that we know about electricity and magnetism. Pretty remarkable that just four equations can do that. So I think already you should be thinking a little bit about ideas like intelligent design. Where do these equations come from? Why should so much of our universe be governed by just a few simple laws like this? I was pretty inspired by this myself. But let me go on. So then this was all classical physics, but then the next big revolution came with Albert Einstein. He came up with let me get the right, yeah, this one. He came up with a theory of relativity, which started with special relativity, which is kind of a modification of Newton's laws. It turns out that things behave differently when you approach the speed of light, and a lot of weird stuff happens. You get length contraction, time dilation, things like that, and nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. And then about 10 years later, he came up with the general theory of relativity, which also modified Newton's theory of gravity. That's on the bottom of the screen. So all this math here kind of explains everything that Einstein fixed about Newton's theory. And then things get a little weirder after that. We came up with quantum mechanics, which is still a mystery to most people. This here is called the Schrodinger equation. It's a wave equation. It turns out that matter has both wave and particle properties. This was a big paradigm shift from classical physics, and it turns out that you can't really separate the observer from the system you're observing, and that things sometimes look like waves and they sometimes look like particles. So, already things are getting very weird. This is very counterintuitive, but this is well known science. I mean, The theory of quantum mechanics is actually the most well-tested theory in the history of science. So it's true, it works, even though a lot of it's very counterintuitive. Um, so where do we go from there? Well, quantum mechanics was very successful. As a matter of fact, it led to something called the Standard Model, and this is everything we know now about particle physics. These are all the elementary particles we know of. You got the quarks on top. Quarks make up all matter we know of. Quarks make up protons and neutrons, which are the nucleus of an atom. Actually, there's also leptons. I forgot to mention those. Electron is a lepton, but there's a bunch of other ones. So anyway, yeah, ordinary matter is made up of quarks and leptons, and then you have these things called gauge bosons. Those are like force carrying particles, like the photon, which is responsible for the electromagnetic force. And then you've got the W and Z, which are responsible for the weak force. You got the gluon, which is responsible for the strong force. And then the final piece was the Higgs particle, which some people call that the God particle because it gives every other particle in the universe that we know of its mass. So already it seems strange, and it's kind of touching on religion and spirituality. And gravity's still not in this picture. For that, you need string theory, and um, string theory is hasn't really. I wouldn't really call it science yet. I mean, it's a beautiful theory. There's a lot of beautiful math involved. These are a few of the equations that went into it to start with. This is a Schrodinger equation I showed you earlier, which is already known. Then you have the Dirac equation, which is kind of the relativistic version of that. That's known too. And you also have this thing called the Klein-Gordon equation, which actually hasn't been tested. That was kind of the beginning of string theory. And string theory is a very, very difficult theory. I tried to study it when I was in graduate school. I didn't get very far with it. But like I said, I don't even know if it's really science. Even though it's very beautiful, nobody knows how to perform many experiments to test it, so it doesn't fall into what Bacon defined as science. Um, but the reason that so many people were excited about it and still are is because it looks like it wants to be a theory of everything. Maybe it is, but right now it's not. It's more of a theory of nothing, actually. But anyway, this is pretty much all we know about, all we've learned about physics up to now. But there's a lot of other stuff we kind of know, or at least I think I believe in. For one thing, I believe in the law of karma, which is kind of represented by this yang and yin symbol. So what you've probably heard it stated as what goes around comes around, which you can kind of picture by this yang and yin. That's not a law of science yet, but we just don't have the tools to explain it through science. And obviously, there's a lot of things we don't know about the universe yet. Science doesn't explain everything we know. These equations on the bottom of this screen are equations of physics we know. I showed you some of them already. But I think that karmic law is actually a law of the universe in the same way as these physical laws down here. We just haven't, figured out the math to describe it yet. I guess the reason why modern science has made me spiritual is because, for one thing, these equations are all very simple equations. You can write them all on one line. These 6 equations here explain pretty much everything that's known about the universe. I mean, you can, the people say the universe on a T-shirt. And a lot of people think there's one equation. The theory of everything. That's why so many people are still interested in string theory. And so this brings up questions like intelligent design. Why is the universe so simple? Why is it explainable by simple mathematical laws? Galileo was very inspired by this phenomenon. He even said that he thought God was a mathematician. And I think, a lot of scientists are atheist or agnostic. I'm not. I used to be. But I think when you really think about what's really going on and try to look at the big picture, it just kind of makes you wonder, what's really going on. And, I think there is some kind of cosmic intelligence behind it. I have become highly spiritual. I even believe in God, although not at all in the traditional sense. Einstein did too. I guess I'm more of a Spinozian. Einstein and Spinoza thought they were what were called pantheists. They believe that God is the universe, God is everything. And I kind of believe that too, but I also believe that he's intelligent and he's conscious, and he may actually be the sum of all consciousness to the universe. So, um, anyway, that's kind of what I believe, and that's how science has helped me, inspired me to become spiritual. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed my video, and I'll see you next time. Good night.